In Judaism, we have two famous characters who are both described as Kanaim, as zealots, people who acted very zealously and ardently for God. One of them is mentioned in this week's parasha. In fact, his name is the name of the parasha, Pinchas, the grandson of Aaron HaKohen. How did Pinchas act zealously? Well, one of the heads of the tribe of Shimon was cavorting publicly with a Midianite princess. He was doing it in a very crass way, in a very promiscuous way, in a way that was utterly forbidden. Pinchas, of his own accord, took a spear and killed him and his consort while they were together in the act, which was a very, very brave and courageous thing to do. After all, he was dealing with the head of the tribe of Shimon. And although this was an incredibly violent act, it brought to an end the promiscuity that had been plaguing the Jewish people. And Hashem blessed him. And he said to Pinchas, I will give you Briti Shalom, my covenant of peace. This covenant of peace is something a little bit vague. It's unclear what the Torah means. Elsewhere, it also mentions that Pinchas was given the covenant of life. And therefore, our sages say that Pinchas lived for a very, very, very long time. He came into the land of Israel. He lived there for a long time. And ultimately, Pinchas became another person. Pinchas became Eliyahu Hanavi, the prophet Elijah. If we look in the book of Kings at the description of the prophet Elijah, it's also very, very vague. It's not clear where Elijah comes from. It tells us that he was a Tishbi, he came from a place called Toshav. Elsewhere it tells us that he was a Giladi, he came from a place called Gilad. The commentators are not sure what tribe he came from at all, although most seem to agree that he was a Kohen, and therefore, of course, related to Pinchas. So whether he's exactly the same person, he just lived for a very long time, or perhaps he's the same person in a spiritual sense, there's clearly a connection between Pinchas and Elijah the prophet. Elijah the prophet was also a great zealot for God. And Elijah lived in a terrible time for the Jewish people. It was the time that there were two kingdoms, the kingdom of Judah in the south and the kingdom of Israel in the north. And the kingdom of Israel was full of idolaters. And the king at the time was Achav and his very wicked wife Jezebel. And they had brought the worship of idols into the country. It had become the state religion. And Elijah cried out his entire life and complained and said to the people, come back to God, come back to God. And at one point, he actually ran away. His life was threatened. He went all the way, he ran to Mount Sinai. And there he says to God, Kano kiniti, I have been zealous on your behalf. The Jewish people have forsaken your Brit, your covenant. But I always acted on your behalf. I always made sure that they would continue to keep the covenant. And he was so desperate and he was so upset at the fact that there was so much backsliding that he actually said to Hashem, take me. And that's what Hashem did. Hashem took Elijah the prophet alive into heaven. What did he mean by the fact that the Jewish people had forsaken the covenant? Well, the simple meaning is that they had forsaken the Torah. But our sages explain in the Midrash that he was referring to a particular covenant, a particular Brit. What Brit? Brit Milah, circumcision. That the Jews in the northern kingdom had stopped to perform circumcision. And Elijah the prophet had tried everything to make sure that people would circumcise their sons. And he says to Hashem almost hopelessly, God, they have forsaken your covenant. It's just not going to happen anymore. And Hashem said to him, Elijah, be calmed, be pacified. I promise you that what you have done is not for naught. The Jewish people, I promise you, will continue to circumcise their children throughout all ages, even when it was very difficult. And indeed, this is something that happened. The Talmud tells us many, many times how the Greeks made decrees against circumcision. The Romans, in our times, in Soviet Russia, it was forbidden to circumcise a child, and yet Jewish people did whatever they could to circumcise their children. They didn't forsake the covenant as they had in the days of Achav, Jezebel, and Elijah the prophet. And God said to Elijah, Elijah, I promise you that the Jewish people are going to keep the mitzvah of bris. And to keep good on my promise, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that you attend every single bris. And you see it with your own eyes, that the Jewish people keep this custom. And that's why it explains the code of Jewish law. At every single bris, we have a special chair, Kisei Shel Eliyahu, the throne of Elijah, upon which the child is placed prior to the bris. And the Mohel says the words, this is the throne of Elijah. Elijah is the Malach HaBrit. He is the angel of the covenant. He should stand next to me, says the Mohel, and he should support me, and he should assist me. And indeed, Elijah is given the special task, the special mission, the special privilege of seeing that, no, indeed, the Jews have not forsaken the covenant. They have remained true to God throughout all of the difficult aspects and eras of their history. They have kept the covenant safe. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom.